Welcome to Dead Souls Social Club.
This audio presentation contains graphic details of death, violence, and controversial subject matter. Listener discretion is strongly advised. From Dead Souls Media, this is Cocaine. I'm Jamie Black, a researcher and psychologist, and I'll be your host for tonight. This episode is part one of a two-part series. We released 2 episodes previously that would make great companion pieces to this episode. If you haven't done so already, check out episode 121 titled Big Pharma, which we released in April 2025, and episode 98 titled Teenage Wasteland, which we dropped in October of 2024. Say, how often do you drink Coca-Cola? Be honest. Once a week? Once a day? All the time? Well, whatever your answer, it's bad. Really bad for you. But the same applies for almost all fizzy drinks in general. Though many are laced with caffeine to keep you hooked and keep you coming back for more, it's big soda's way of being one step ahead of boring old water, right? But savvy gimmicks aside, there's no getting past the fact that pop, fizzy drinks, soda, carbonated beverages, or whatever you want to call them, are terrible for your health. Although certainly better than what they used to be. But I'm not here to preach healthy lifestyles or wholesome foods to you. We're not that podcast. But soda was originally considered to be a health drink when it first emerged onto the market. It contained, quote, essential sugars. It was first introduced in the 18th century, and at the time, they thought that it had healing properties that might cure a vast plethora of medical conditions. Thus, the first fizzy drinks were actually sold in pharmacies or drugstores. Pharmacists would often mix medicines into the fizzy drink for you at the point of purchase. For instance, you might order a lemon and lime with lithium citrate, or perhaps a caffeine and cocaine remedy. All perfectly legal and normal at the time. Because cocaine was perfectly legal, and in fact, the leading doctors and scientists at the time thought that cocaine had beneficial properties. The cocaine alkaloid was first isolated from coca leaves in 1859 by Albert Nyman, and doctors at the time immediately embraced it. You could get cocaine drops for toothaches, or cocaine throat lozenges, for example. It was even used as an anesthetic by dentists and surgeons. Sigmund Freud actually widely used cocaine and promoted it as a cure for depression and sexual impotence. He became super addicted to it, and it took him more than 12 years to break his habit. Cocaine was found in all sorts of elixirs and tonics in the late 1800s and early 1900s. But when it came to the king of cocaine concoctions, there was one strides ahead of all the others. It was said to give you energy, strength, zest, and vitality. Whatever zest is. The authors Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Jules Verne drank it. Queen Victoria regularly partook in it. US Presidents Grant and McKinley were fans. And even Pope Leo XIII carried it in a hip flask with him at all times. What I'm talking about is a beverage called Vin Mariani. But what exactly is Vin Mariani, I hear you cry? Well, it's a combination of cocaine and wine. It's 6 milligrams of cocaine per 1 fluid ounce of red Bordeaux wine, to be exact. It was created in 1863 by French chemist Angelo Mariani and quickly became hugely popular. The combination of cocaine and alcohol leads to the formation of cocoethylene within the body. This compound acts to decrease the feelings of drunkenness from alcohol alone and heightens euphoric sensations. So, an alcoholic beverage that gives you energy, you say, rather than acting as a sedative. Doctors suggested you drink 3 glasses of this every day for adults, if you could afford it. Only half that for children, of course, because children have to take it easy on cocaine and alcohol, as we all know. So, much like anything that emerges from a foreign country, the United States had to have their own version, which was uniquely American. And with this in mind, in 1885, John Pemberton, a pharmacist from Atlanta, Georgia, invented Pemberton's French wine coca. He combined the extracts of the coca leaves and the cola nut to achieve his formula. It provided much vigour, Pemberton boasted. Then he hit a marketing problem almost right away. Atlanta passed a prohibition against alcohol in 1886, thus making his drink illegal. Not because his drink contained cocaine, of course, but because of its alcohol content. So, to get around this issue, Pemberton replaced the wine element with a sugar syrup and renamed his product Coca-Cola. By 1902, the amount of cocaine in Coca-Cola was reduced to just 1/400th of a grain of cocaine per fluid ounce of cola syrup. Cocaine didn't become illegal in the United States until the passage of the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act of 1914. But that happened because, well, cocaine was becoming problematic. As it was so freely available to all, much like heroin at the time, addiction was quickly becoming a significant issue within the United States. This almost directly reflects the current-day opium and fentanyl crisis within the States. Back then, they put cocaine in so many things, and anyone at any age could buy it, so they essentially overprescribed it. And then people, not surprisingly, got addicted to it, and many lives crumbled because of it. By 1912, there were around 5,000 cocaine-related deaths annually on average. And those in power made African Americans scapegoats in the press for causing this nationwide addiction problem. Because racism. Low-wage employees would be given cocaine by their employers to make them more productive at work. And of course, no one commented on how low-wage white employees were also given the same product at the time, of course. So the narrative emerged that there was an explosion of drug use among African Americans. It was a way to demonize black Americans, and it worked. It became the first cultural link between black people and drugs in American history. But as we will soon see, this never really went away. But due to the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act, as well as the James Miller Act of 1922, cocaine use eventually fell to the wayside. A nationwide issue of widespread usage of something that the authorities now considered dangerous was stamped out by the US government, making it illegal and removing it from availability. This decision and laws saved many lives. No further comment on this part. But let's jump forward a few decades, to the 1980s. In the 80s, the economy was booming within the United States. People wanted to party, and cocaine started flowing into the country from all over the world. And of course, the price of cocaine dropped by as much as 80%, so the suppliers had to get creative and find new and cheaper ways of selling cocaine. And what they landed on was crack, which is basically cocaine mixed with baking soda and water. It sold for as little as $5 for a crack rock in 1985, and it became really popular in lower income communities. Actually, it was a scourge. It decimated poor urban neighborhoods, which we're about to discuss.
See this cute little vial here? It's crack, rock cocaine, the most addictive form. You think it's the glamour drug of the 80s? Well, that's the point of this fronted little reminder. It can kill you. And if you've got to die for something, this sure as hell ain't it.
The response from the United States federal government only compounded the problems in the poor neighborhoods of the day. They passed a law called the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986, and amongst a lot of other stuff that was in this bill, one of them was that it differentiated the sentences between cocaine and cocaine-based drugs. Lighter sentences for regular cocaine, heavier sentences for crack cocaine. In other words, if you got caught with a little baggie of cocaine, your sentence would be a lot lighter than somebody who was caught with a couple of rocks of crack, even though the amount of cocaine in crack is far lighter than that of regular powder cocaine, because it's mixed with other stuff. At the start of the 80s, crack flooded the prison system and low-income and minority areas, because it was cheaper. So it was almost like the poor were being punished much harsher than the wealthy, who preferred the more exclusive form of pure powder cocaine. But let's start at the very beginning.
You know, it was like, who cares if you were a good person or how well you took care of your kids? Who cares if you paid your taxes and worked hard? That all goes out the window. It doesn't happen overnight. You won't really notice it happening because you're so busy getting high, but it will ruin your life. I lost everything.
In 1981, and well into the third decade of the Cold War, Ronald Reagan was sworn in as President of the United States.
With a deep awareness of the responsibility conferred by your trust, I accept your nomination for the presidency of the United States.
Ronald Reagan promises wealth for everyone. He promised to improve the lives of everyone by stimulating a free market that would help lift people out of poverty. He used trickle-down economics and promised to, quote,
For those without job opportunities, we'll stimulate new opportunities, particularly in the inner cities where they live. For those who've abandoned hope, we'll restore hope and we'll welcome them into a great national crusade to make America great again.
Sure, in the 80s, money did quickly start to flow. It was the return of the city. Bankers and stock traders were king. There was a sense of optimism amongst disenfranchised voters. You see this in the culture at the time. Nightclubs were filling up again. A celebration lifestyle emerged, and cocaine was very much part of that lifestyle.
Drugs got blamed for all of the conditions that the society had allowed to fester and were unwilling to confront. We are still picking up the pieces of the 80s today. And it's because the government and those making the national decisions didn't want to help us. They only wanted to punish us. Man, the crack era changed everything for the black community. As usual, we were demonized and kicked. But soon enough, it changed and affected everything about the whole of America too.
But powder cocaine was a luxury back then. A wealthy person's pastime. People that were driving around in Mercedes-Benzes or BMWs. Powder cocaine was not accessible to inner city folks and people of colour because it was too expensive. They generally couldn't afford it. In the United States in 1979, uncut powdered cocaine was selling for upwards of $50,000 to $60,000 per kilogram. Ounces typically sold for around $2,000, and grams were $100 a bag. By the 80s, due to increased supply and demand, the cost of kilos dropped to around $25,000 a piece, so $50 a gram bag. So whilst the price came down significantly as supply increased, it was still expensive for the blue-collar person to sustain a regular habit. Then, what arrives with President Reagan's promise of wealth proliferation comes his administration's elimination of 500,000 people from US welfare rolls. 1 million people were removed from food stamp eligibility, and millions more citizens were entered into extreme poverty. 8.5 million Americans are now unemployed. Reagan's trickle-down economics benefited many, but it was many of the wealthiest in society who simply got wealthier. 1982 becomes one of the highest years of unemployment in United States history. This is felt in the already struggling black communities even more. More than 2.6 million American children are removed from school lunch programs to save money. The working class is struggling to survive. I spoke to two people for this episode about their experiences during the 1980s, both affected by poverty and the wave of cocaine that would sweep across many US cities. Michael is from Los Angeles, California, and I got to meet him on a trip to the city I made back in March. He will be voiced by an actor tonight. Patty is from Newark in New Jersey. She has lived there all of her life and has been through the most horrific and desperate of times.
I grew up in a very impoverished neighborhood. All the families there was on food stamps, man. It was like fake paper money with, brown purple colors and looking like you in a third world country. We didn't have money, so a lot of time we were home ourselves, the kids. So we would always go to the larger grocery stores and steal. We would go to Vaughn's to earn money by carrying people's groceries home. Sometimes we'd walk with someone carrying their groceries. And sometimes we would just run off with their bags. Sometimes we didn't have lights, gas. We had roaches in the house, mice. It was pretty bad. All us kids' clothes were hand-me-downs. A lot of it was just about survival, man. You don't really understand the trauma of poverty. And I think any method we could employ to escape the fact that we were broke and oppressed, we would do,
Remember when I spoke about supply and demand? Well, between 1982 and 1984, the amount of cocaine entering the United States increased by 50%. There were several reasons for this. Supply and demand was only one of them. The drug routes were between South Florida, where tons of product would enter via boat and small airplane, coming from Central America via the Bahamas. It would then be shipped to Philadelphia and New York, where it would find itself placed into an organized nationwide distribution network. By 1984, more than 5.5 million people regularly use it. That means at least once weekly. On June 9th, 1980, hugely popular black comedian Richard Pryor entered the news when he sustained third-degree burns after using a butane torch to light cocaine freebase. The news media capitalized on the incident.
Fire department paramedics found writer and comedian Richard Pryor wandering dazed and badly burned over the upper half of his body near his Los Angeles area home last night.
He had used freebase, which is a combination of cocaine and ether. And when he ignited it, whether it was on a cigarette, we don't know, the ether exploded, causing his clothes to be engulfed in flames.
Y'all did some nasty-ass jokes on my ass.
This story triggered news outlets such as the Philadelphia Inquirer, Chicago Tribune, and the Boston Globe to run regular stories about the new trend of freebasing cocaine. Rolling Stone magazine also reported controversially and irresponsibly about cocaine being the, quote, top-of-the-line model of the Cadillac of drugs. Media outlets were far fewer in the early 1980s, and they had a much larger reach and influence compared to today's media market. These news reports became a wake-up call to a lot of people that there was another way of using cocaine, a much cheaper way.
Is there anyone out there who still isn't clear about what doing drugs does? Okay, last time. This is your brain. This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions?
Cocaine is essentially a molecule, cocaine hydrochloride, and the hydrochloride portion is a salt. You can't smoke it if that hydrochloride portion is present, so you have to negate the salt. So with freebasing, the salt is removed and now you just have the base. After mixing powdered cocaine with a weak base, such as baking soda, it changes composition and a solid is produced, often referred to as rocks. This solid has a much lower melting point than powder cocaine, allowing it to be smoked as opposed to snorted. The lungs are an extremely quick and effective way of getting something into the bloodstream. When the smoked cocaine solid, or crack as it came to be known due to the sound it makes when it's heated, meets the large surface area in your lungs, it too slips right through the membrane and heads directly to your brain. It takes just 8 seconds. For clarity, this is much faster and more intense than snorted cocaine, which generally takes around 5 to 10 minutes to reach the brain. Once in the brain, crack and cocaine act in effectively identical ways. Users feel energized, alert, and much more aware of their senses. The crack acts on the ventral tegumental area, thus releasing large amounts of dopamine, the chemical associated with feelings of pleasure and euphoria. This dopamine release then travels between neurons and binds to receptors that trigger good feelings. This dopamine would normally be reabsorbed back into the neuron by a dopamine transporter, but crack changes this process. The crack attaches itself to the transporter and blocks the dopamine reabsorption, allowing it to build up and continually stimulate the receptors. As a result, the user will feel really good for about 10 to 20 minutes. But afterwards, this dopamine level in the brain will plummet, causing an extreme low with feelings of depression. Most users will then smoke more to stave off the dopamine crash. But dopamine levels can take a long time to replenish, which causes a physical and psychological dependence, also known as an addiction. Those who claim that they can take the drugs and not get addicted are lying. Lying to themselves and lying to others. Because it acts on everyone's body and brain in the exact same way.
This is crack, rock cocaine. It isn't glamorous or cool or kid stuff. It's the most addictive kind of cocaine, and it can kill you. What's really bad is nobody knows how much it takes. So every time you use it, you risk dying. It isn't worth it. Look, everybody wants to be cool, but doing it with crack isn't just wrong. It could be dead wrong.
Many people early on, when they would buy the powder coke, would cook it themselves, but it took a lot of mixing and weighing, and it was an effort. Given the option, many people preferred not to go through all of that process. They preferred to have it already rocked up for them. In the 1980s, crack broke out onto the market and its popularity skyrocketed almost overnight. Crack was being sold for $5 or $10 a hit, so poorer people could now get access to what was previously being considered a rich man's drug. Poor people who were really struggling and needed an escape.
I was 16 and still in high school, but I needed to make money, bad. My girl was having a baby and we needed a place to live. Things were tough. My mother was like, just get a job. I wasn't qualified or experienced for any job. My options were McDonald's or Burger King. Man, at McDonald's, you only made $3.35 an hour. That was minimum wage back then. And that was before taxes and all that shit. That ain't gonna work for me, man, you know. So, a friend of mine came to me with these little vials. I asked him what it was, and he was like, it's crack, man. Coke already cooked. He said it's easy money. Just sell it to anyone who wants it. He gave me 100 of the vials. In less than 30 minutes, it was all gone. Right away, I saw that I could make quick money. Yo, this was it right here. This was the gold rush.
Stories out of the black neighborhoods at the time were that the police turned a blind eye to the dealing of crack. Ex-police officers from then have stated that they didn't want to be in those communities, so they just wanted to get their work shifts done and then get back home to their families. That was the general feeling and sentiment at the time. Crack was allowed to fester, grow, and spread. Crack was initially perceived as an inner-city drug, an urban problem, and this meant that the perception was that black and Latino people were using it and selling it. It was a minority problem, even though large amounts of white users were supplied by these smaller minority communities. In the days of heroin and all previous drug epidemics, they had to be bought from the mafia. It was controlled by the organized crime gangs. You couldn't just sell it. There would be severe repercussions. But with crack, it emerged so fast that there was no middleman. You didn't need anybody's authorization to sell it. And thousands of people who were struggling financially saw this as an easy way to make money. You could easily set up a small shop on the corner, and all of a sudden, groups of particularly young men can find a way to support themselves, support their families, and survive. But those setting up their figurative stall and claiming their patch had to protect it to ensure their survival. And thus emerged a massive increase in, quote, ghetto violence. Kids were turning into crack kingpins overnight, ages 14, 15, 16. There quickly emerged an entire economy built around crack cocaine. These kids could be earning several $100,000 a day in sales. What mattered to them was money, clothes, jewelry, and girls. The lifestyle was alluring to those who had never had any money or luxuries before. Teenage dealers could do what they wanted, when they wanted, and get anything they wanted, at a time of booming capitalism and rampant consumerism. Selling drugs became fashionable, but that protection of their patch and business meant that many of these young men and teenagers had to arm up. They obtained semi-automatic handguns, Uzi 9mm, Glock handguns, and in some cases AK-47s. What crack did is gave more people guns, and more people started to settle their differences with guns. Now they are not trying to survive, but they are trying to thrive in a pool of hungry sharks. And in order to survive in this pool of sharks, the dealers had to become ruthless, savage and uncompromising to stay on top.
Man, the amount of people that I seen actually get killed. But it was normal, you know. We became desensitized to how people that we were close to was dying.
In 1985, crack-related killings are blamed for around 65% of all homicides in the United States. There emerged regular reports and instances of drug dealers getting robbed, getting kidnapped, and getting murdered. Those cases were rarely solved, let alone investigated. For many of the police, the inner-city neighborhoods were a no-go zone, even for them. It became a war on the streets. What began as a quick and easy way to make money, which turned previously nice boys, church-going boys, family-centered boys, into hardened and cold-blooded killers. Funerals became a weekly occurrence.
One day I come out from my shift. I have 300 vials of crack, and the blue and whites roll up right inside the park, right up to me. He takes my bag. "Show me what's in the bag," he says. I gave it to him and I'm like, damn, I'm gonna jail forever. I'm thinking, should I run right now? I'm dead. And the guy goes, he looks in the bag, the cops, 2 cops. He throws the bag back at me and looks at me and says, "Tell your boss I did you a favor." So I run over to his house like, yo, you ain't gonna believe this shit. Yo, I just got popped by the cops. And he's like, "What you talking about, man? We paying them off. Man, get your ass back out on the streets." I said something like, "You serious?" He's like, "Man, get back out there. We losing money." That's how I found out we was paying off the police.
The money that flowed from crack seeped into everything. It corrupted almost everyone. It corrupted the whole neighborhood in some form or fashion. It corrupted local government, public authorities, and civil services.
We Americans have an endless fascination with police stories. Just look at the popularity over the years of TV cop shows. Some true to life, others pure fiction. Well, there's a police story being told here in New York this week that is so shocking you couldn't make it up. Richard Threlkeld has the story in tonight's Eye on America.
What would you steal?
Money and drugs and guns, whatever was there.
Why were these beatings done?
To show who was in charge. We were in charge, the police.
I wasn't the first person to think of this. It was ongoing.
Every day on the streets of New York, it's cops against criminals, good guys against the bad guys. But as police corruption hearings have revealed this week, some of New York's policemen are the bad guys.
I remember reaching into a box full of cocaine and taking out 2 big handfuls and putting them in my pocket and walking out.
The star witness, Michael Dowd, a police officer for 10 years before he was convicted on drug and racketeering charges. He and a handful of fellow officers turned into common criminals, he said, while his superiors looked the other way.
There was times when I was shocked that I got away with so many of these things.
What did he get away with? Burglary, for one thing.
This is probably the most embarrassing thing I ever did as a police officer.
While investigating a burglary, he had the victim's daughter call her mother to ask if she had any valuables hidden in the house.
So she called her mother, and her mother told her where the money was hidden, and I found it for her. But she never got it.
Eventually, Michael Dowd got rich. A fancy sports car, fancy clothes, 4 homes.
How much money were you making a week for your narcotics activities?
Anywhere between $4,000 and $5,000.
How much money were you making a week from your New York City paycheck?
About 400.
What protected him, Dowd said, was the so-called blue wall of silence. Cops don't snitch on other cops, even if they're bad cops. He learned that, he said, as a recruit at the police academy. Us against them.
When you say us against them, who is the us, Mr. Dowd?
Us is the police officers, and them is the public.
Dowd wasn't the only witness. Bernard Colley's a former cop now in prison on drug charges. They called him the mechanic because he beat people up, innocent people, too.
How many individuals do you think you administered beatings to in the 46th precinct?
Approximately 300 to 400 people.
Mr. Crowley, weren't you ever afraid of getting caught at doing this?
No, who's going to catch us? We're the police.
Why was all this allowed to happen? Sergeant Joseph Trimboli, a police investigator who for years tried unsuccessfully to bring some of the bad cops to justice, says that police brass looked the other way.
Seeing the police openly taking payments festered resentment in the black communities. Communities who already had very little trust and faith in the authorities from decades of second citizen treatment. But this resentment only grew. The more that crack devastated the black communities, that gang wars caused by crack ruined lives, the more the resentment and hatred for the police intensified. Crack became like a pandemic, like a virus in the air. It changed the entire American culture. Inner city, working class, blue-collar neighborhoods became decimated. Trash filled the streets. Millions of people became addicted.
Crack changed my whole personality. It made me not care about people. I didn't care about my friends or my family. I saw myself going down more and more, but I wouldn't and I couldn't stop it. I could see my life was in ruins, but I didn't care. All I cared about was getting my next fix. I start losing weight, my waist getting skinny, my shirts getting too big. I tried to hide it at first, but when they got worse, I didn't care who saw us.
Quickly, the drug became the great divider, like none other had done so before. It divided people from their lives, from their money, from their health, and sure enough, from their families. The media soon picked up on this and focused on the impact of family lives in their reporting. The press zeroed in on women of color in particular, the impact of crack specifically on black women. In the next episode, we will expand further into the decade of decadence, how women of color were demonized and treated by society, and what ultimately became the government's response, and how that led to the industrial prison system of today and the militarization of the police. Good night, everyone.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to our show tonight. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your chosen podcast platform and subscribe to our show so that you never miss an episode. Our shows aren't sponsored by any company or corporation, so any support you can give us goes a long way in supporting the work that we do. From all of us here at Dead Souls, sleep tight.